everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks, First Here's What Happened podcast. And today I am joined by a fellow critic and a fan of the film that we're going to discuss, The Electrical Life of Louis Wain. I want to say Louis because that's how Bajans say we say Louis, but it's Louis Wain. He was an artist in the 18th century in England, and he was very interesting. And his character is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, and I think he did a fantastic job. And we'll get into that. But before we do, I'll just have Valerie say a little bit about herself, and then we'll get into the film.
Hey, hi, I'm Valerie Thompson. You can read my work on sites like Consequence and the Playlist, and probably all around the board. And I'm really excited to talk about The Electrical Life of Louis Wain as part of my Toronto coverage. My favorite film at the Toronto Film Festival this year, actually. So let's jump into it.
Yeah, it's really good. So for these types of podcast episodes, I usually like to do a little bit kind of not pros and cons, but like get the things that we don't necessarily like about the films out of the way, and then we can go straight into the positive and end on a positive note. So is there anything about the film that you didn't really like? For me, I think probably only have like one thing, but is there anything that you thought could have been done better or that you thought needed more expansion in the story or characters?
I felt like it was pretty straightforward. If I was to think about anything, you know, I really can't think of anything that I would say. I mean, it balanced drama and humor and quirkiness. It balanced it quite nicely. And I was just sitting here thinking, is there anything that I would say no? And no, absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm the same way. The
Yeah.
only thing I think I had that I thought maybe just needed a bit of tweaking was the pacing a little bit. Like some of the scenes I felt were a bit uneven. Like there's this scene where Louis, he's in this, I think it's a ship. Like I still can't figure if he was in a
Oh, when he's
ship.
coming back from New York?
Yeah, he was in the ship coming back from New York, and like the way how the scene ends, it feels kind of like there was something more to come.
Yeah.
And because like the way how Benedict ends the scene, he's like, like just it's like very sudden. I'm just like I was wondering if it's like maybe there was supposed to be another side to that scene that we were supposed to get a different perspective. So like there were some parts where the editing just felt a bit off, and the pace was just I think needed a bit to be a bit more tighter. But other than that, like the rest of our conversation is just gonna be about all the things that we love about this film because I think it was
Right. I know, right? Yeah, this this is a really unique story. I was not aware of Louis Wain. Were you before this film?
I was not, but the thing is, so I forgot to mention this. So the film was directed and co-written by Will Sharpe, but I was not familiar with his name. But when I was watching the film, I recognized some of the artwork.
Right.
So I was like, oh, I've seen like some of these illustrations like online, like like, or I've actually seen like them in like in like films or TV shows, especially those produced by the in Britain, like BBC kind of thing, and like you might see like those kind of arts, and like you can see inspiration because I would bet money, probably a small amount because I don't have much, but that famous velvet painting of bulldogs playing poker.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that was inspired by his artwork because he actually has like he's done it with the cats and with bulldogs where he had like animals like doing
Yeah.
anthropomorphic. And you see, and there's like there's shows some of his artwork where like the animals are sitting around the table like at the Last Supper,
Yeah.
giving those kind of illustrations. I was wondering, I'm like, is this famous artwork of the bulldogs playing poker inspired by him? Which I would not be surprised if it is.
I have no idea. The end of the film really shows you all this great artwork of his. And I mean, it was across the board. And
Mhm.
interestingly enough, throughout the film, they kind of chart how his style of drawing and painting changes, especially toward the end of his life when it gets very like almost psychedelic.
Yeah.
These impressions of him. But yeah, I was really intrigued by that. I would like to know more about his artwork. Honestly, I mean, I came into this very cold, not knowing anything about him. So anything they could reveal about Louis was to me fascinating. I will say, poor Louis had such bad luck, didn't he? You're pulling for him. You want him to like have these amazing things happen to him, and it just seems like everything always falls through. By the time it got to the war and his futuristic cats sinking in the boat. My heart broke for him. I was like, oh.
I felt for him from the very beginning because the way how Will Sharpe directs this film is very interesting, and where it doesn't actually, I don't think, starts out quite linear, because it starts out as a where actually where the film stops, where it ends, he begins the film slightly before the ending of where the film stops. So that's an interesting way to do it. And there's this funeral procession. I'm like, don't tell me we're starting this film with this man's funeral. Don't tell me. I was like, no. But then you see like Benedict walking in the funeral procession, so that's where you forgot it's his father that it was like, don't tell me we're gonna, because that's actually a British way of filming these kind of like period dramas. Because if you watch things like, you know, those films set in like the late 1700s to the early 1900s, there's a very particular way that the British tell these stories. And I was, and like they do, a lot of them do start out with like possibly somebody dying. If you've seen oh my gosh, it's the North by Northwest, North and South, sorry, not North and North by West, North and South. And like Sense and Sensibilities and like those kind of film, those kind of like book adaptations, there's always some funeral procession involved.
Yeah.
And it reminds you, like, people died quite early and quite often back in the day.
Yeah.
Like they did not live long lives. And Louis is actually an exception because he died, I believe, at the age of 78, which is long.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah.
long.
It is. And you know, it struck me, you know, I guess we can be spoilerific here. When his wife is diagnosed with breast cancer, you know, and they basically just they say, yeah, that's it, you know, get your affairs in order, few weeks you're gone. I mean, it really strikes you, there was no medical technology. And to think about the medicine of the time, how there was nothing, that there was really nothing to help you if you were diagnosed with something like cancer that was terminal. I mean, they literally told her she had weeks, I believe.
Yeah.
And I love the way they filmed that period of time that he had with her. You know, those moments that they had together. And isn't that wonderful, that shot that they had where he painted on, it looked like he painted on the camera, right? And they're just framed like that together. Oh my gosh. But yeah, and I loved that. I loved those moments when it was her and him and Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
I mean, those three were just
yeah, I think this film actually tackles a lot of things, and I think we can get into those. Like, one of like starting with what you're talking about, like their relationship, because I think it talks a lot about how romance and relationships were perceived and like and you know like discussed back in that time. And then there was also the lack of medical help and medical knowledge about diseases like
yeah,
cancer and also mental illness, which we'll get into. And then also how people who are considered eccentric or you know like are different, what they would have called different or not normal, like which Louis was. Like he was a very eccentric person. He was very effervescent and very happy, but he was also very naive and he got swindled a lot, or he didn't know how to handle money, which is so like all these things. I think the film like we wove them into the story really well, and we'll get into the, but I want to start like what you said with his wife Emily, played by Claire Foy, which I did not immediately recognize, because like I think the hair and makeup department did a fantastic job
they
with
did.
her and also with Benedict Cumberbatch. And but she was, I think she was really good because her character, she's Emily, she's actually, I was reading through the Wikipedia, so she was 10 years older than him. So he was actually 23 and she was 33 when they got married, which at that time would have been a big scandal because
Uh-huh.
she's not only older, but she's like 10 years older, and she was his sister's governess. So that's like the whole class system and then the age and all of that. And like it was a concern because like he's the sole breadwinner now because he's the only male. Their dad died. He's the oldest of six children. And having this responsibility of being a man, and he has to earn money, but he's gonna falling in love with the governess, a woman who doesn't have money, because they're the ones who don't have money, and they still have to pay her. So the sisters are like, what are you doing? Like this marriage will bring no benefit to this
Yeah.
family whatsoever.
Yeah, and you know, I can't imagine living in a time period like that where it's just those decisions have to be made. And I understand where the sisters were coming from. You know, in that time period, Louis was the only man in their family. Um, None of them were married. Uh, you know, I don't think any of them got married along the way.
No,
So
no.
I can imagine in that time period, a lot was riding on Louis for them. Women just were not uh them living by themselves. They couldn't possibly have been um considered high up on the social ladder if that happened to them. I'm assuming during that time period. But I mean, so I know some people may quibble with some of the decisions that the sisters make along the way, and yeah, I can see where their relationship with Louis, it got strained, and I understand those motivations as well. But I can also see everybody's side in this story,
Mhm.
where they were coming from, and maybe that's a testament to the film, right? It doesn't play villains here, as far as I'm concerned. Everybody's motivations are on the table, and you understand why they were doing what they were doing.
No, I agree. I think the writers, so let me look up. I had it pulled up. Excuse me for looking down. When I mean, if you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at my phone on my notes. But um, and I will edit this part out.
Will Sharpe and Simon Stevenson.
Yes, so Simon Stevenson is the co-writer with Will Sharpe, and I think, like you said, they did a really good job of balancing each character's storyline. Because we got to the sister Judith,
Yeah.
played by Sophia DiMartino, who is also Will Sharpe's wife, actually, by the way, and plays Sylvie in Loki, in the Loki series. So she's a great actress, but like she plays the older sister, so she's the second oldest sibling, and she has a lot of, like, struggles because she is the one with the most money sense. She's the one with the most responsibility. She or is just the most responsible nature. She understands how businesses operate because when Louis begins writing, creating his artwork, she was like, "Did you not get it copyrighted? All of this money that you could have been raking in is lost because you didn't get your artwork copyright." And he had no idea about this. And this is like a few years after he began selling his art. And like, so, but even before then, when after the parents died, all of the responsibility of running the household fell on her, which is something that was very common then, and it's still kind of common now because, like, even in patriarchal societies, they say, "Oh, the men run the household, the men do this, men do that," but then it's still on the women to actually physically run the households, look after the finances, make sure they have food on the table, make sure all the
Yeah,
kids are dressed and all these
absolutely.
things. And you're like, exactly what do men do?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Credit to Andrea Riseborough. I just wanted to credit her
Mhm.
as the older sister, as the oldest sister, I believe.
Yes.
Um, from I I've loved her since Birdman. Birdman's one of my absolute favorite films. Anybody that knows me knows that. But she gives a great performance in this movie, right? Because you know what? It could have easily been painted as she was um dominant, and she was a bitch, and she was just in it for herself. She wanted to keep Louis with the family, and but instead you very much see her as a woman dealing with, oh my god, what are the neighbors going to think, what are we going to do, what, yeah, it's constantly like, you know she's, I mean, I got the impression she's scared because she's looking out for her family, right? This is, a lot of things going on in her life, and she feels very stressed out about that. And I think some films would have made the decision to make her the villain,
Hmm.
or paint her in a bad light. And I'm so happy this film didn't, because you really genuinely just feel that she's like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You know, I'm scared. When you see her with the scenes with the governess, and she's like, don't you want to not stay on this floor? She has, Louis down the hall, and she's like, don't you want to stay downstairs? Or because she sees,
Mhm.
and it's not that she doesn't love Louis, or maybe she doesn't, want him to be happy, but she's also thinking, oh my god, Louis may, start dating this woman. Oh god, I don't want to, deal with the stress of this. So I love the way she played that too.
Yeah, no, you're right, because that's actually who I was referring to. And I said Judith. I mixed up the sisters. There are five of them.
There's so many sisters, and there is literally so many sisters in this movie. It is this movie is sisters and cats.
Exactly.
Sisters and cats would have been the alternate name for this film.
Yes, it's Caroline, as you said, played by Andrea, who is the oldest, the second
Yeah.
oldest sibling. So that, like I was saying, the one who has all the responsibility, and she does, like I just said, like I think they did a great job in not villainizing her, because I I could see if this was made by either not a woman, but by a different writer or a different male writer or a different male director,
Yeah,
her being like using a cat as an analogy, her being characterized as this catty woman who's
yeah,
always bitter and angry and and is
yeah,
like possibly jealous of Louis, but she's not. Like she's very supportive of him. She loves him and she wants the best for him. But it's just that she's under so much stress and she
right.
just wants him to help her. She's like, I need help.
Yeah,
I need you to make this
yeah,
just a bit better and easier for me because the fact that the society is a patriarchal society is what's stopping her from doing what she could. Because if she was a man, she would be able to go out and work and earn money and bring it in, and Louis would be able to make his
yeah,
art without the pressure of the responsibilities, which is I think is what she wanted because she's like, I want you to make your art, I want you to be
yeah,
successful, but I also need you to be a bit more responsible and remember where your priorities lie. But she's not a man, so like she had to
yeah.
struggle on to make him do what she wanted to do.
And I mean, Louis, when we are first introduced to him, he's coming back from that agricultural show, I think is what he calls
Yeah.
it. I'm assuming he means a fair. But
No,
I'm
it's
not.
an agricultural show because like they still do it like in the Caribbean and like in
Oh, okay.
farming cities and towns in North America and across the world. Like agricultural fairs, like where you would go to like there's livestock on sale and like people would like you would like barter for like if you want to
Yeah.
buy a cow that you would want to breed, you that's where you would go to barter cows to buy to breed or like buy hard grain, like set up your deals for the coming harvest season, that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay. So when we're introduced to him, he's coming back from the agricultural fair. I
Yeah,
want
look
to
at a
say.
mess because he went
And
fighting a bull.
yeah, and he's drawing, and then he comes back and he's taking boxing lessons, and he's wrote an opera. We don't go back to that, but he's wrote an opera. I mean, he's doing all these things, right? And I can imagine the sisters at home are kind of like, well, we don't need to go do boxing lessons or go to the opera or write an opera or things like that. So I mean, in a way, Louis kind of had that privilege to do that,
Exactly. And he did it with, and I think that's just how his brain was. Like his brain was
Yeah,
always going. He always had ideas.
yeah,
He like these like I
yeah,
am not gonna like diagnose, but like he would be considered hyperactive,
yeah,
right? So that's I think that's how
yeah,
his brain was always just going and going and going. Like you mentioned the inventions, like and he wrote this opera and the guy was like, there's no harmony, there's no melody. He's like, but there is to me. And like but the
yeah,
guy was like, I love the drawing on the front of the book though. But
yeah, right?
so he's just like this super fast, and we don't get much male characters
Yeah,
or any from anywhere that are like Louis, where like they're allowed to be
yeah,
like as they said hyperactive, and they're not like like manly or they're not like assured, and he's just like I'm a scatterbrain. I just want to make my art.
yeah. And I mean, um, full credit to Benedict Cumberbatch with this performance because um I think some actors would have took it too far and took it too far, the whimsical kind of eccentricness of it, or they would have toned that down to such an extent that you would have lost that side of Louis. And I found that he kept this really great balance, right? And it was also a very respectful balance of Louis' eccentricities. And I know so many people are bringing up his performance in Power of the Dog, rightfully so, but he really delivers in this film too. And that was one aspect that really, I think, if he had not approached it that way, if it had been a different actor, I don't know that it would have worked as well.
No, I agree because I love his performance in Part of the Dog because it's very powerful and is powerful in the way that his character is this person who's mean. Like every action that
Yeah,
he did seemed mean and hostile and like just filled with rage and resentment. Like I mean, just he would look at somebody. I'm like, why are you looking at the person so meanly? Like he saw a flower, he just like yeah. But you know what I mean? And like, but we have seen him be intense. We have seen him because if you look at it, Sherlock is just another flip side of that kind of intensity. Sherlock is just a bit more. I think Sherlock, thinking about it, is actually like a combination of Louis and Phil.
Maybe. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I think sure. I think like so. I think that's why he was able to play these two characters, these two very distinct characters, so well because like he's played a character that kind of like meets in the middle of them.
Yeah.
Thinking about it, but I do actually prefer his after. I love Power of the Dog, and I was like, oh, I love this. I can see him being nominated, but I would actually nominate him more for Louis than for Phil because it's so different to him like, from everything. Just the way he uses his voice, his facial expression, his body. Because if you watch, because the film starts so where he's young, Louis young, and he's like he doesn't he walks. He has a very distinctive gait, but it's still very young and like filled with energy. And then as he gets older, you can see his gait start to change to someone that is aging, and you know his body's becoming weaker. And then like the very last shot, like you can see how he's going up these stairs, and you can see Louis useful gait, but still like this age gate going on. Just like that moment alone, I'm just like, that's so good. That's such good acting because like his whole body is like in this character. And like my scene, the scene that broke me when like he was in the sanitarium and the guy that he had met on the train, like coming back from the agriculture fair, he was like, there are no cats. The tears
Oh,
started to fall when I'm like, there are no cats for Louis. Like that, like, I'm getting emotional thinking about because this man loves cats. Like cats are his happy place. And he's like, there are no cats. I was like,
oh, I know when he said there are no windows and no
and there's
door.
no windows and he can't see the world. I'm like, no, legit. My sister's like, what's wrong? I'm like, this film. I'm like, my emotions. I'm like, oh, I would. That should be his nomination reel. That one sequence. Send it off to the Oscars. I'd vote for it. Like,
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, oh, that sequence, the sequence, when he loses Peter. I was just gone. I was just gone when he walked in and found Peter had passed. I was like, no.
I was like, this man can't catch a break. I'm like, he lost his dad as he's struggling with his family. His sister is ill. He lost his wife. I know he's lost his cat too. I'm like, why?
How much more can he go through? Yeah, I was the same way. I was the same way. I mean, you could not help but tear up sometimes, right? Because you just want Louis to catch a break.
Yeah.
You just want it to be goodness and something, just have some happiness, right? But uh there is, it's important to point out because I don't know that people necessarily get that from the trailer. Uh, but this film is very emotional, and it's not all quirky, and it's not all funny. You know what I mean? It is some really poignant, sweet stuff in it. So people, if you see the film, just kind of go into it knowing that you're probably going to need a Kleenex. You're also going to smile sometimes. And
Yeah, because it's like we talked a bit about the financial difficulties because it does show, I think, very like you said, poignantly, and I think in a very nuanced way how things like finances and mental health
yeah, absolutely.
and also wanting to find direction in your life actually kind of all meet up together because he has the like we mentioned before, the financial responsibility of looking after his sisters, but then he also wants to be with his wife who supports him, but then she's sick and him not having and him being a very naive person, not fully understanding what her being sick really meant because there's like this scene where she was like in pain and he wants to like how he wants to go outside and she's like, I can't, I'm in pain, Louis. I have cancer. And you can see that he didn't really understand until that moment.
Yeah.
I think that was the moment where he realized my wife is gonna die. And like Benedict, that like his face, like with the way the camera like focuses on his face in that moment, like that's the moment of somebody who's just like realizing I'm gonna lose someone again. And he's like, and like but he can't like be sad because it's about his wife, it's about Emily in that moment. But that's one thing about him, he's a very selfless person and he loves with his whole heart. And that's, I think, it comes through in his interactions with his family. And that's why his sister can't necessarily get upset with him because she understands that he's just trying the best that he can. But then he's learning again about mental illness with his sister, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he again is trying to understand what this means. He doesn't fully get it, but he does his best to be supportive of his sisters and to be supportive of his family in the best way that he can.
Yeah, I know. And it's that it's that one scene they
Oh,
go to the beach.
Mm.
he and the sisters, and he's sitting with the sister that has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and and they're sitting together watching everybody else in the water, and it just hits, that scene just hits, because you realize they're both going through the mental health issues they're going through, and so it's kind of that disconnect to the rest of their family, but they understand each other
Exactly.
even though they
I,
may not have the same conditions.
I actually love that scene because like you mentioned, like they're sitting on the sea on the shore, and they're sitting on this blanket, and they're just sitting next to each other, and they both admit that
Yeah,
they're scared, and they're both scared for different reasons. I think for Louis is that he's scared of losing more people, but he's
mhm,
also scared of water because it's revealed that he's terrified
yeah,
of water, and like and whereas for the sister, she's Maria, she's terrified of being committed to an insane asylum because she knows that she's slowly losing her grip on
yeah,
her sanity, and she's like she knows that every day things are getting worse.
yeah,
And but I love that they both get to have that moment together. That's another thing, like the film, we do get to have moments with Louis and his sisters, like individually, and they get that moment together where they're both, as you said, they understand each other, but they're also just able to be in that moment. But visually it also shows like how how they're physically and mentally, and I think emotionally, different to the rest of their family, because there's the divide, which is the shoreline.
yeah,
Like the sisters are able to frolic and play in the water, they're able to like celebrate and live life, but these two other individuals, these two other siblings, they can't. They're removed from this thing, which is kind of how mental illness works, and like depression and stuff, where you can see people living life but you can't fully
yeah,
take part in it. So I think it
yeah,
was a very, I think that is a very well directed and very well constructed shot. So I would say that's also one of my favorite ones in the
yeah.
film, because it says so much about these characters and about the family in one frame.
And another interesting technique that the director Will Sharpe used, I thought, was as we go along with the story, the cats, we start being able to see some of their thoughts, or what they're saying.
Yes.
We start getting these little, and I love that scene when the man from the mental institution comes to speak to Louis, and he's like, "Oh, well, you must be here to study the cat because she's getting very close to speaking." And so we see these great little subtitles come up, and the cat's like, "I'm not there yet," or something like that, and
Yeah.
yeah, and I had to laugh at that, because as we go along, the cats start having this dialogue. So like when they're going to the beach, the cat's like, "Where are we going?"
Yeah. Which I think was really neat because Louis sees them as people. He had this theory that like cats would one day be up and walking like humans, and they're so smart they'd be able to find a voice and be able to converse, which is where a lot of his art was inspired. Like they're outright, they're anthropomorphic, having like what we would call like human expressions, but animals without giving our own understanding of them. Like they are smart and they are super intelligent. And like looking at my dog, like my dog looks at me, the expressions, I'm like, I know you're saying something about me, but I don't know what.
Yeah,
But Louis, but Will Sharpe and the crew, they did that. They what Louis always wanted, they gave in this film, which is that we got to see what the cast were thinking. They were given a voice, which I thought was so cute.
yeah,
And I'm just like, I love that we got these little, they got their own little subtitles and their own little script.
yeah.
Like, it was like fancy script too. Just like they were like, if you're gonna talk, you're gonna have fancy script.
I know it was lovely, and I just kind of, I initially, well, I viewed it more as, that was, we were getting what they were saying, but also we were finally understanding Louis' conversations with them, and it's very subtle how they start introducing that through, but I loved that technique. I mean, it was kind of out of left field, but it worked. I think some
Yeah,
people may have used a voice actor or something, and that would not have worked. But this
no,
was,
we didn't need to hear them audibly, but like just like the subtitles was enough, and it was so unique because like I don't think I've ever seen that happen in a film unless it was like a cartoon or something, or like a film where like the animal. But then as you said, like, they'd use voice actors for the animals. Like we didn't have that because it doesn't fit the story, and it doesn't fit the type of film being made. But like I fully understand like Louis having full conversations. I have full conversations with my dog. Like I talk to her like she's a person, and I'll be like, "Girl, what are you doing?" I call her little girl. I'd be like, little girl, what you doing? But
No,
like that's
and it's such a I mean, there's another aspect of this that the director mentioned before the film, and certainly in the film it's mentioned that apparently Louis Wain, his drawings inspired people to in Britain to have cats as pets. They had not thought of them as pets before. I thought that was really, I mean, I don't know how truthful that is. I guess I really don't know, but I just thought that was a really interesting thing because they did show cats that were just living on the street or, people were just talking to them. But I wonder how much stock is in that. Did he inspire people to have cats as pets? I don't know.
yeah. I was reading through the Wikipedia, so like he was president of the Cat Association for a couple years, and from what I'm seeing, it, like, there were people had cats, but like it wasn't like as common before. It was more dogs because the British and Europeans are generally dog people. Like they love dogs, so like most people had dogs as pets. They like very few people had cats, and they did kind of see cats more as like they use cats like for mousing, which they just keep them around just like to catch mice and rats and that kind of stuff. Because like England was infested with rats at that period of time before because like it was filthy. Like it was
Yeah.
not the cleanest place before the Industrial Revolution. England was a cesspool,
Oh.
but they only kept cats like for like to catch mice and rats and just like for vermin control. They weren't seen as like pets that you would cuddle. I think that was reserved for dogs. And even then, like only rich people like of the aristocrat and royalty had like the fancy frou dogs, like the
Yeah.
small
Yeah.
frozen. But because I think around that era, like they were beginning to see cats as pets, and because of his artwork, and because I think he anthropomorphized them, made them more relatable to people, so people were taking them in more as like commonplace animals instead of just like service animals, as you would say.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering about that fact. I didn't think they would have dropped that. I certainly didn't think the director would have mentioned that before the film and
Hmm.
mentioned it during the film if it wasn't some kind of thing to that. But it's interesting to think about, isn't it? That one man's drawings could inspire people to see things a different way. And I mean, maybe see things through Louis' eyes, I guess, in the end of it.
No, I think it does because like it might like for my tweet after I watched it, I think I like one of the things I said is it helps I think the film is important because it shows about accepting people that we perceive to be different and the beauty of those who see things in others in other things. Because like as I said, people may not necessarily see cats as beautiful or as or things that they could keep as like pets and like love dearly and that kind of stuff. But Louis did that for people, even his family. Like they didn't really care for cats before, but then after Peter, like they took these cats with him everywhere. Like like they went to the beach, they went like like when they went to the countryside, they had each of them had baskets and they traveled with these cats. And the sisters, I noticed that we never see the sisters say anything negative about that. They never complain about walking with these 6 and 7 cats at one time. Like these cats are a part of their family, which is I think is one of the things in the film showing like Louis loved these animals and he loved this artwork and his family accepted that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a good movie.
Hmm.
Just a good movie. What else can I
Yeah,
say?
I loved it. And one of the things I want to talk about, like you mentioned it before, is there's a scene where he's painting and it's on the camera, which is kind of like not expected for a film set in the late 18th century. You know what I mean? It's not like it's just 1800, not 18th century, but it's not. You don't expect that kind of like interactive modern look to the film. But I want to talk a bit about the aesthetics because I think it's a bit unique to other films, period dramas. I think from that time.
Yeah, I noticed, I think he was painting glass, at other points in the film, but I liked their use because sometimes, especially when you got to stuff about, ships and the water, they would kind of, take away the realism of the film, right?
Hmm.
And suddenly you're kind of seeing it through Louis' eyes almost, and I like the fact that they were able to add some of that fantasy and some of that, um, POV maybe to just play with a little bit, um, you experiencing Louis' world through Louis' eyes for a little bit.
Yeah.
that goes back to that scene on the ship, coming back from New York you were talking about. I mean, that goes back to him thinking about when he was a kid. Like
Mhm.
that goes to when they go to see the Tempest, right? I mean, they had those great sequences where they tie that together, and of course in his journals, right? Those really illustrated journals he had, right? Of those same kind of things. So that's an interesting technique to kind of bring you into his mind a little bit through his eyes.
Yeah, because he had a very imaginative and active mind. Like again, reading on Wikipedia, they said that the way how he visualizes art, especially in the later periods, was they said some scientists think it was a sign of schizophrenia, but like even if he wasn't schizophrenic, even if he was, I think his mind was beautiful. I think he had a beautiful mind, and the way he saw the world was
Yeah.
beautiful. And I like that we were like Will Sharpe kind of give us a sense of that, of him, how his mind was always going and like always colorful, but then like everything like we said before was not rosy for Louis. Like he had a very tumultuous life, and like he had these extremely unfortunate events, and like on the ship coming back, that's the scene you expect in a film set in the modern time, where like he's being plunged in the water, and it's like we're in this immersive experience with him.
Yeah.
But and you see why, and he's always, and the thing is he's calling up for his mom and his dad, and he's always talk, and he has this fear of drowning. And I kind of saw that as not only, I don't think only drowning physically, but I think
Yeah.
emotionally and mentally, because he's always afraid that he's gonna lose himself. He's always afraid that he's gonna be overcome by whatever this sense
Yeah.
of doom that he has.
Yeah, because I know that at the time period, certainly mental health issues were not discussed like they are now.
Mm.
I mean, he had to know that there was that his mind was working on a different frequency, so to speak. He talks about electricity all the time,
Yeah.
right? Everything's working at different electricity. And he had to know my mind's not exactly thinking like everybody else. But I have to imagine at a time period like that, it must have felt so frightening and so
Hmm.
much stigma to it, right? I mean, even today, there's so much stigma still around mental health issues, but I can't imagine at that time how he must have felt, um, or what he must have thought about, how his mind was working, how is, this is not looking like everybody else. Is that
Hmm.
okay? Is that all right? We don't talk too much about his childhood. But I have to wonder, especially as a child, how he processed things. Is this okay? Is this normal? Is this all right? And there was nobody to say, um, you know, maybe you're experiencing this or that or whatever. So I wonder about the real Louis Wayne. How did he go through life? Did he feel like I'm normal, everybody else is the problem, something like that? But it's an interesting thing to think about, and it's certainly, talking about mental health issues is always a good thing, um, if it's done with care and decorum. And certainly this film um, is not exploitative in any manner to that subject, which I'm glad to see.
Yeah, I think the film handles mental health issues very well. And like going, I'm gonna get to that, but I think one of the things I want to touch on is like Nui would be called neuroatypical, and I kind of related to him in that way because I'm neuro, or some people say neurodivergent, some people say neuroatypical, and I'm the same because I'm dyslexic. I also have cognitive impairment. And also the way, because so like the way that I perceive information is very different to other people. Like I will use his family as an example. Like I have a twin sister. She's not neurodivergent at all. She's not dyslexic. And like people, when we were growing up, people will always say, why don't you think the way your sister does? Like they would expect me to understand things the way my sister did. And she would have to say, but my sister doesn't think like me. Like, and that's fine. Right. But and I can, and like Louis' family is the same way, that his sisters understood how he thought. They understood his thought process. Other people did not. They look at him and say, you're weird, you're abnormal, whatever. And luckily his sisters understood that. They never condemned or criticized him. And like they were just like, our family's quirky, our family is not normal, and like it's like my brother is who he is. But he would have felt, I think, extremely stigmatized at that time, because like men, again, having responsibility, have to act a certain way, they have to behave a certain way, and he didn't act or behave the way people would have expected him to act. He would sit down and just start drawing randomly. Like where he met the guy on the train. Like he just pulled out his sketch as his sketchbook and just started sketching, and like the guy was like, oh, oh wait, and like he's like, okay then, and then he got it. But then for other people would have probably said something about him like, why are you acting like that? And like
Mhm.
I've gotten that. I've gotten people like teachers especially would they didn't understand like how my brain works and they expected me to like work to do things the way other students did at school. And it can be isolating. It can make you feel lonely. It can make you feel as though like believing that no one understands you is a very isolating feeling. And it's only when I became an adult, especially I would say in my 30s, where I actually became more comfortable with how my brain functions and the way my brain thinks. Like for I only became more comfortable even mentioning that I have dyslexia and cognitive impairment. I would say probably in the last 4 or 5 years, because before I believed it was stigmatized, and I didn't want people to think that I was an idiot, or that I didn't have the intellectual capacity to have like specific discussions or do certain things. And even like with film criticism, I didn't think I was smart enough to do it, because it wasn't that I wasn't smart and have the knowledge, but I just didn't think that the way I thought or the way I think about things would appeal to people. So I kind of related to Louis in that way. But then like Louis, he was like, I am what I am, and it is what it is. And
Right.
I'm gonna create my art the way I want to create it. And like that's one thing with him. Like he may have been unsure of a lot of things, but one thing he was sure about was his art. And that's one thing I love that we got to see in this film, is like we got to see him be very confident in what he wanted as an artist. Like he had a specific look and a specific vibe, and he never let anyone tell him how to do his art.
And that's the way it should be.
That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so the next thing I want to talk about is about we talked about it is the mental health, how mental health is handled in the film, because we have not only like Louis, we get the sense that the others say he's neurotypical, neurodivergent, but he may also have mental health issues, which is two different things. People being neurodivergent and neurotypical has nothing to do with mental health. Those are two separate issues. But there is the sense that something is happening, and we get to see that later down in the film, where he is eventually his family put him into a sanitarium because like they can't look after him, and he needs someone to look after him 24/7. But before that, we got to see his sister, and it's interesting watching someone who is afraid of their own declining mental health having to struggle or learning to live with someone who is progressively getting worse with their mental health, their diagnosis, and their schizophrenia.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, i- and I think you can really see that in Louis. He's terrified. He's
Mhm.
terrified for his sister. He's it's genuinely, it's not coming from a place of how does this affect me? It's genuinely this concern for her.
Mhm.
And I think so often when people with mental health issues, they discuss it or they try to talk to loved ones about it, it often becomes that loved one saying, well, but what about me? Or, why aren't you doing this? And I so appreciated seeing Louis um just kind of put everything that he had been through, everything that he was, to his side, and saying, I'm just genuinely concerned for her.
Yeah.
And not how is this going to be seen by the neighbors, or how is this going to affect financially, or how whatever. It was from a place of genuineness and understanding and compassion and love. And I wish that more people going through these struggles were able to experience that. Um, at least somebody, that one, loved one or family member that cared like that,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, because that's that's another thing. I've said it before, but that's I think probably one of my favorite things about the film is that we get to see these two individuals in particular be surrounded by love, because all too often when we have films that talk about mental health issues, even if it's supposed to be in a positive aspect, there's always at least one character who says something not nice, who says something critical or mean, because they're supposed to represent the person that doesn't understand mental health, like we
Yeah.
always get that one person, which honestly I'm just like, can we just not have that moment of negativity? And this
Yeah.
film give me that. This film give me where everyone, even like strangers, I don't think we saw any scenes with strangers like being mean to any of the characters, which I think was good. I'm like, everything about this film is sweet and positive, is poignant, and it's sad, but there's like no mean people that I can think of.
I mean, you'll come across somebody I feel like was misguided or uninformed, like the woman that was running the sanitarium or something like that. Um, but I didn't find her to be cruel to
Mhm.
the patients. She just misinformed or didn't quite know what she was dealing with, I guess, or something like that. Because but yeah, this is a film where everybody there's no villains.
Nope.
I can't find any villains. I can't find any bad guys. I thought through about this. Even his editor at the
Mhm.
publication is understanding. I mean, he tells her he tells him, go spend those last weeks with your wife. This is important time. Or you can borrow my house at a reduced rate for you and your sisters to stay in and just leave the city for a while. I mean, even that character, somebody would have spun that into a evil villain character. No, not in this film.
Yeah.
Everybody was genuinely, I think, coming from a good place.
Yeah. If anything, the only villain is death.
Yes,
Death would not
lots
leave
of
me
death,
alone.
lots of death in this film.
Yeah, so sad. And a lot of them are like some one right after the other. I'm just like, good God, poor Louis. But so we'll begin wrapping up. But like one of the I think I love the ending of this film. And
Yes, the
and
painting.
the painting, like he's standing there, like he's finally because I think what happens in the film is like he creates his artwork and he's not immersed. Like we got to see him immersed in other things, but we don't get to see him immersed in his artwork. And well, I'm wrong. The only other time we get to see that is when with Emily, where they're sitting and like they see like they're imagining the artwork and stuff, and like what they imagine their world to be.
Yeah.
We got that at the end. So we got kind of like a reflection at the end where he's like, look. And I'm like, yes. And I'm like, he's finally in his artwork again. He's finally getting to see the world again.
Yeah, and finally, I think in that happy place that he was with Emily and Peter.
Yeah. It was just like, oh, fine. I'm like, he's immersed in colors again. And like, again, like just before he died, like he was someplace where with people who understood him. Like he was surrounded by cats. Again, like there were cats like just walking around the grounds. I'm like, yay! I'm like, yay! Cats again.
And after they by the way raised the money, and like his sisters and the man that we met at the beginning of the movie,
Yeah.
and HD Wells. Where did that even come from? They
It's
raised the
true. It happened. I was looking at it. I was like, oh, it did happen. H.G. Wells and also the Prime Minister of England at that time helped raise money to help to have Louis stay at a home in the countryside where he got to keep cats.
and he had windows and cats and plenty of space to enjoy his world. So
I know. I was like so happy for Louis, but I was like, oh, you know, people like we made people be prepared to smile and cry because there's some true and laugh because there's some truly funny moments in it. Like some of his reactions just like had me dying, but like just prepare for the emotional, the tears, the emotions, all of them.
I have to say one of the funniest moments in this film for me was when his sister runs into the room. I'm a woman.
Oh yeah,
And he's like, what is she talking about? And the other sisters look at each other like, I know what's going on.
yeah. I love it. I think it's probably out of all the films that I've seen for TIFF, it is the happiest film because all yeah. All the other films that I've seen have been like deep dramas or or
I agree.
like
I mean, yeah, every other film I've seen uh this year at Toronto, maybe Doug.
I haven't seen that one.
Doug is just a really it's interesting. It's kind of fun. It's kind of weird. But I recommend that one. That kind of had this kind of quirky satire about Indian religious figures. But other than that, it's been pretty heavy duty
Yeah,
going here this year.
it's true. It is true. A lot of things have been very, very heavy. The only other one I would say that come a bit close to like the grave digger's wife, but that is also kind of like the electrical life of Louis Wayne, where it's just like, can these people
Catch a
get a
break.
break?
Yeah.
Like, my God, like it's one thing after. I'm like, these people love each other so much. Just give them a break, world. Why?
There'd be no movie if everything went smoothly, I guess.
I know. Like it's like oh world.
Yeah, right.
I think that's also the perfect way to end the film. So before we end, is there you mentioned Duck Dog. Are there any like name two of your other top films for the festival?
Two of my other top films. I really enjoyed the Dionne Warwick documentary, Don't Make Me Over. I thought that was really good. Um uh let me see. I'm trying to think. That was one that really struck me that I liked. Violet, I thought was good. Of course, Petite Maman. Everybody
Mhm.
loves Petite Maman. So I'll leave it at those those four. Um, The Guilty had some good moments. Um, yeah, that's what I'll leave it at.
Yeah. The only ones of those I haven't seen is Violet and The Guilty. So yeah, but the Dionne Warwick documentary is good, and that one, like, she's hilarious. I think she's so
Yeah,
funny,
she's
and like she's amazing. Like Dionne Warwick is a legend, and the documentary I think is probably one of the best documentaries I've seen in in a while.
and I
And
have to say this year in terms of the festivals, and a side note, the documentaries are killing it this year.
mm,
And music-based documentaries, the Sparks Brothers from Edgar Wright, Summer of Soul with from Questlove,
yes.
the Dionne Warwick documentary. There have been so many good ones, and I know my brain is just fracturing here. Julia, I'm Polly Murray. I mean, so many good ones this year.
Yeah, let me, and then also I would also say in the same breath by Nan Fu Wang. That one premiered at Sundance. And also the Amy Tan Amy Tan, I
Yes.
can't remember the full title. Is it Unauthorized Biography? But it is with her. I one thing I love about that one and the one with the Warwick is I love documentaries where they get to celebrate the people while they're still alive. Like we get to hear their
Yes.
experiences from them. Like it's not all just secondhand or third-hand knowledge. It's all this relevant information, all these momentous events from their like their careers are being told to us by these women. So I would
That
recommend
was
those.
what was so great about the Dionne Warwick. I mean,
Yeah.
she was like so open and honest
Yes.
about everything. I mean,
Yeah.
they even talk about the Psychic Friends Network. It's a fantastic
I
documentary.
know, like, and they did it briefly. They didn't like dwell on that, and we're like, "Oh, she did this thing. Moving on." But she was like,
Yeah, I know.
"We're like, we did. She did this. This happened. Moving on." And oh, that one also had another a moment that made me cry when the scene with the where they sang "That's What Friends Are For."
Oh,
I cried. I'm like, oh,
oh yes.
the
Oh,
emotions. Yeah, so I think this is like the perfect place to end our chat. This was such a great discussion. Thank you so much for talking with me, Valerie. You
it's great
can
to be
tell
here.
us, yes, I know that we haven't like seen each other in a while.
Yes, we have. Yeah,
Like
we
this
have.
entire pandemic. But tell everyone where they can find you on social media, and then you mentioned where they can find your work, but tell everyone where they can find you on social media so they can follow you if you.
You can find me on Twitter, and my name is Val M. Thompson, ThompSon on Twitter. And I'm on Instagram, Val M. Thompson as well, ValMThompson.